They spent years telling everyone I abandoned them, built a perfect story where I was the problem and they were the victims. And for a long time, I let them believe it, until the night I stood in front of a room of people who trusted them and told the one truth they could never deny. Because what I said in that moment didn't just expose a lie, it destroyed everything they had spent years trying to protect. So if you stay with me, I'll show you exactly how one speech changed everything. Chapter 1. The day they left me and called it normal. I was 9 years old the day my mother told me to wait at a train station and never came back. It was late afternoon just outside Richmond, one of those small platforms where the paint on the benches is chipped and the schedule board flickers like it is thinking about giving up. I remember the heat rising off the pavement, the way my shoes felt too big for my feet because they were hand-me-downs from Tyler, and the way my backpack barely had anything in it except a folded sweater and a granola bar that had already melted into itself. My mother, Donna Quinn, had parked just far enough from the platform that I could still see the car. She leaned over, brushed something invisible off my shoulder, and told me to stay right there. Just for a minute. She said she needed to grab something from inside. I nodded, because that was what I always did. I nodded when I did not understand. I nodded when I did. Tyler was in the passenger seat. He was 12, already taller than me, already louder than anyone else in the house. He did not look at me when I got out of the car. He was looking at his phone, or pretending to. As I closed the door, I heard him say something under his breath, something that sounded like a bet. I did not catch all of it, just enough to know it had something to do with me crying. I did not cry. I stood where she told me to stand. I watched the doors to the station. I counted people who walked in and out. I tried to remember if she had said how long she would be. A minute felt like 5. 5 felt like something longer than I could measure. The first train came and went without stopping. It roared past like I did not exist, like the whole platform did not exist. The wind it pushed against me made my shirt stick to my skin. I remember thinking that if I stepped just a little closer, I could feel what it was like to be pulled somewhere else. I stayed where I was. After a while, I looked back toward the parking lot. The car was still there. That made it easier to wait. That meant she was still close. That meant this was still normal. Then I looked again, and the car was gone. There was no moment where I saw it leave, no slow realization. One second it was there, and the next it was not, like someone had erased it and forgotten to tell me. I did not move, not at first. I told myself she had just parked somewhere else, that she would walk back any second and tell me I had done a good job waiting, that this was a test, like the kind teachers give you to see if you follow instructions. Another train came. This one slowed, doors opening for a handful of people. A man stepped off with a suitcase. A woman in a blue dress walked past me without looking down. Nobody asked why I was standing there alone. I kept counting. I counted how many people walked by. I counted how many times I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. I counted how many times I told myself not to cry because if Tyler was right about one thing, I did not want to give him that. At some point, the lights started to change, the kind of late afternoon that turns everything softer, like the world is about to close for the day. I realized I was getting hungry. I opened my backpack and took out the granola bar. It was warm and sticky, but I ate it anyway, slowly, breaking off pieces so it would last longer. That's when I understood something I had never needed to understand before. This was not taking a long time. This was not a mistake. This was not normal. I was still standing there when she walked up to me. Margaret Calloway did not rush. She did not look panicked. She looked like someone who had decided to be exactly where she was supposed to be. She stopped a few feet away, just close enough that I could see the lines around her eyes when she smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to tell me she saw me. "You have been standing here a while," she said. I nodded. "Are you waiting for someone?" I nodded again. She looked past me, scanning the empty lot, the quiet road, the station doors that kept opening and closing for everyone except the person I was waiting for. "Have you eaten?" I shook my head. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small paper sack. She held it out, not pushing it into my hands, just offering it, like it was my choice. "There is a sandwich in here," she said. "You can have it." I hesitated for a second because I had been taught not to take things from strangers, but I had also been taught to listen to adults, and she did not feel like a stranger in the way that mattered. I took the bag. "Thank you," I said. She nodded once, like that was enough. "What is your name?" "Elara." "That is a beautiful name," she said. "I am Margaret." She did not ask me where my parents were right away. She did not start with questions that would make me feel like I had done something wrong. She let me take a few bites of the sandwich first. She waited until my hand stopped shaking. Then she asked if my mother had told me how long she would be. I told her. She said a minute. Margaret's face did not change much, but something in her eyes shifted, like she had just confirmed something she already suspected. She asked if she could call someone to help. I said yes. The police came, then a woman named Linda Carver from Social Services. They asked me questions I tried to answer as clearly as I could. My name, my mother's name, our address, Tyler's name, what happened. I told them everything exactly the way it happened, because I still believed that if I explained it right, someone would fix it. Linda stepped away to make a call. I sat on the bench with Margaret beside me, holding the paper bag in my lap like it was something important. I did not mean to listen, but the platform was small, and her voice carried. She said my mother's name. She said mine. She explained the situation. She waited. I could not hear the words coming through the phone, but I could hear Linda's responses. There must be some misunderstanding. "No, ma'am, she is here with me." "Are you saying you will not be coming to get her?" Another pause. "All right, I understand." She hung up, then stood there for a second longer than she needed to, like she was deciding how to walk back over to me. Later, there would be another call. Later, there would be paperwork, a certified letter, another chance for my mother to change her mind. She did not. That night, I did not go home. I went with Linda to a temporary placement, a house that smelled like laundry detergent and rules I did not know yet. I slept in a bed that was not mine, in a room with walls that did not know my name. For 2 years, I moved between places like that, always temporary, always almost something, always waiting for a version of life that felt like it belonged to me. Margaret visited. Not once, not out of obligation, she came back again and again. She brought books, she brought food, she sat with me and asked me about school, about what I liked, about what I wanted, as if those answers mattered. In 2011, she asked if I wanted to live with her. I said yes before she finished the question. The paperwork took time. Everything official always did. But when it was done, I moved into her house, into a room that had a window facing a small garden, into a life that did not feel like something I had to earn just to keep. She never asked me to explain what happened at the station. She didn't need to. She built something new without pretending the old thing had not broken. Years passed. I grew up, I went to school, I stayed. In 2022, Margaret died quietly in her sleep, at 74 years old, in the same house where she had taught me what it felt like to be wanted. 3 years later, in 2025, I stood in the middle of the Briarfield Public Library after closing, holding a stack of papers for a project I had been working on for over a year. The Margaret Reading Room. A space for kids who needed somewhere to go after school. A place that felt safe without asking too many questions. Something I had built because someone once did the same for me. I was locking up when my phone started vibrating in my bag. I ignored it for the first time, then it buzzed again and again. By the time I pulled it out, the screen was filled with missed calls. 17 from Tyler, 5 voicemails, 2 messages from a number I did not recognize. I stared at his name for a long second, my thumb hovering over the screen without touching it. He hadn't called in years, not on my birthdays, not when Margaret died, not when I graduated, not when I got this job. Now his name was everywhere. The first voicemail was short. "It's me. Call me back." The second was sharper. "Elara, this is not funny. Pick up." By the third, his voice had changed. "Mom's not doing well. You need to call me." The last message was just one sentence. "She's dying." I stood there in the darkened library, the only light coming from the desk lamp near the front, and listened to his voice echo through a space I had worked so hard to make quiet. I did not feel panic. I did not feel urgency. I felt something colder. I scrolled up to the top of the call log and looked at the number again. 17 missed calls in less than an hour. That was not concern. That was pressure. I locked the door behind me, turned off the last light, and stepped out into the night air. The parking lot was empty, the kind of quiet that usually made me feel safe. My phone buzzed again in my hand. I did not answer. I slipped it back into my bag, walked to my car, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. They hadn't come back for me. They had come back for something I had, and for the first time since I was 9 years old, I was the one deciding how long they would have to wait. Chapter 2. The Story They Told About Me. I let the phone sit in my bag the entire drive home. The vibration muffled against the leather like something trying to get out that I had already decided to ignore. When I finally checked it again in my driveway, there were 3 more missed calls, 1 new voicemail. I didn't play it right away. I just sat there with the engine off, listening to the ticking sound of metal cooling under the hood, the kind of quiet that lets thoughts get louder than they should. Then I pressed play. His voice was different this time, lower, slower, like he was trying to sound like someone who cared. "Elara, listen, I know things have been complicated, but this is serious. Mom's in hospice. You need to come back. We can talk. Just call me." I replayed the word hospice in my head. Not sick, not in the hospital. Hospice. That meant final. That meant no more pretending this was temporary. That meant he was choosing his words carefully, trying to pull something out of me he had no right to ask for. I locked my phone and went inside. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet Margaret used to love. I dropped my bag on the kitchen chair, set my keys down in the same place I always did, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at nothing in particular. I told myself I would deal with it in the morning. But the next morning, it was already there, waiting for me. Not just on my phone, everywhere. At the grocery store, a woman I barely recognized gave me a look that lingered too long. Not curious, not exactly kind, something softer, like she thought she understood something about me that I hadn't said out loud. I reached for a carton of milk and heard her behind me. "I heard your mom isn't doing well." I turned slowly, trying to place her face. It took a second. Karen Doyle. She used to live 2 houses down from us when I was a kid, the kind of neighbor who always knew when someone came home late, who waved from her porch like she had been waiting all day for that moment. She smiled at me now, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You should go see her," she said. "Family is everything, you know." I nodded, because that was still my first instinct. It always had been. Then I took the milk and walked away. By the time I got to the checkout, I could feel it building. Not anger, not yet. Recognition. This wasn't just Tyler calling me. This was something else. At the library, it got clearer. Diane Mercer was already at the front desk when I walked in. She looked up a second too quickly when I came through the doors, like she had been waiting for me. "Hey," she said, a little too bright. "How are you doing today?" I set my bag down and gave her the same answer I gave everyone when I didn't feel like explaining anything. "I'm good." She nodded, but she didn't move on. "I heard your mom isn't doing well." I paused. "Who told you that?" She hesitated just long enough to tell me she had not thought that question through. I think someone from your old neighborhood mentioned it, or maybe it was at church. I'm not really sure. People talk. People talk. I repeated it in my head, turning it like something sharp I needed to understand before it cut me. I spent the next hour pretending to focus on emails, but every time I looked up, I caught something. A glance that lingered, a conversation that stopped when I walked by, a tone that shifted just enough to make me feel like I had walked into the middle of a story I hadn't been told yet. By lunchtime, it was no longer subtle. I stepped out to grab coffee and ran into someone from the community board, a woman named Linda who always introduced herself twice like I might forget. She placed a hand lightly on my arm, the kind of touch meant to comfort even when it wasn't wanted. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, after everything your mother has gone through, still trying to find you all these years. The words landed wrong, not because of what they said, but because of how certain she sounded. Trying to find you. I pulled my arm back gently. What do you mean? She blinked, surprised, like she had expected me to nod and accept the version of the story she had already decided was true. Your mom has been talking about you at Grace Fellowship for years, about how you left, how she never gave up looking for you. It's actually really moving. Something in my chest went quiet. Not loud, not explosive, just still. I thanked her for the coffee I didn't ask for and walked back to the library without finishing it. By the time I got to my office, my phone was buzzing again. I didn't wait this time. I answered. What? There was a beat of silence on the other end, like Tyler had expected something else. Maybe panic, maybe guilt. Finally, he exhaled. There you are. I leaned against my desk. Say what you need to say. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. That's not how this works, Elara. It is now. Another pause. You heard about Mom, right? I did. Then you know this isn't something you can ignore. I closed my eyes for a second, letting his voice settle into something I could separate from the rest of the noise. What do you want, Tyler? He didn't answer right away. You really don't know? No. The shift was immediate. We need to sell the house, the one on Maple Ridge. You're on the deed. There it was. Not grief, not regret, a transaction. I let out a slow breath. And you need my signature. Yes. Not, how are you? Not, it's been a long time. Just, yes. What happens if I don't sign? He didn't hesitate. The bank takes it. We lose everything. We. I opened my eyes and looked out at the empty reading room, the shelves still lined with books that Margaret had once picked out herself. That sounds like your problem. His voice sharpened. It's not just mine. That's Mom's house. The same house where she told me to wait. The same house I was never allowed to go back to. I said nothing. Elara, he continued, softer now, trying a different angle. You need to think about this. About her. She doesn't have much time left. I almost laughed. Think about her? I pushed myself off the desk. Do you remember the train station? What? The day she left me there. There was a long silence. That was a long time ago, he said finally. We were kids. I wasn't asking about you. Another pause. You need to let that go, Elara. This is about now. Exactly. I hung up before he could say anything else. For a few seconds, I just stood there, the phone still in my hand, the echo of his voice bouncing around a space that suddenly felt too small. Then I walked out of my office and straight into Mark Ellis. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't look like his usual smile. It was tighter, like he was holding something back. Hey, Elara, he said. Got a minute? I nodded. We stepped into the small conference room near the back. The door closed behind us with a soft click. He folded his hands on the table. I've been getting some calls, carefully, he said, from people in the community about your family situation. I waited. Nothing confirmed, he added quickly. Just concerns. You know how things spread in a town like this. I did. The Margaret reading room opening is coming up. It's important to the board, to donors, to the library's reputation. I felt it before he said it. We just need to make sure there won't be any distractions. Distractions. That was one word for it. I kept my voice steady. Are you asking me to step back? No, he said quickly. Not yet. We just need clarity. That's all. Clarity. Outside the room, I could see Diane at the desk, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Her eyes flicked toward the door for a second before she looked away. Inside, Mark was still watching me, waiting for something I hadn't decided to give him yet. I met his eyes. I'll handle it, I said. He nodded, relieved, like that was enough. As I left the room, my phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. I didn't need to listen to know who it was from, but I played it anyway. Elara, Tyler said, his voice tighter now, less patient. We don't have time for this. The bank's already involved. If you don't sign, we lose the house. You're not the only one this affects. I stood there in the middle of the library, surrounded by rows of books that had always made sense to me, listening to a story that didn't. You're not the only one this affects. For the first time that day, something sharper than recognition moved through me. Not anger, not yet. Something clearer. They weren't asking, they were setting a deadline. And somewhere between the train station and this moment, I had stopped being the girl who waited for someone else to come back. Now, they were waiting on me. Chapter 3. The paper that changed everything. I didn't answer Tyler again that day, and by the next morning, I already knew I wasn't going to. Instead, I drove across town to see Ruth Adler. Margaret used to call her the only person she trusted to tell her the truth, even when it hurt, which was probably why I went to her first. If there was anything in this situation that wasn't exactly what it looked like, Ruth would be the one to find it. Her office sat above a small real estate firm, the kind of place that hadn't changed its sign in 15 years. The door was unlocked, like it always had been. She looked up when I stepped in, reading glasses halfway down her nose. "Elara," she said, taking a moment longer than usual to study my face. "I was wondering when I'd see you." I closed the door behind me. "I need to understand something," I said. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Then sit down and tell me what's going on." I didn't waste time. I told her about Tyler's calls, the hospice message, the house on Maple Ridge, and the one detail that didn't make sense no matter how many times I replayed it. My name is on the deed. I never signed anything. I was a kid. Ruth didn't look surprised. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled together like she had lined up pieces she had already seen before. That house was refinanced in 2009. I remember because Margaret asked me to look at something around that time. Not for herself, for you. I felt something shift. For me? She nodded once, already reaching for a file cabinet behind her. Margaret didn't trust your mother's financial decisions. She had reason not to. The drawer slid open with a soft, metallic sound. Ruth pulled out a thin folder, flipped it open, and placed it on the desk between us. "Take a look." I leaned forward. At first, it didn't feel real. Just paper, just typed words and signatures that didn't belong to me. Then I saw it. My name. Not handwritten, not added later. Printed clearly as a co-owner. Elara Quinn. I stared at it for a second long, waiting for it to make sense in a way it hadn't before. "It's not a mistake," Ruth said quietly. "I was 9. I know." I looked up at her. "Then how is this legal?" She adjusted her glasses. "It wasn't about you signing anything. It was structured as a form of joint ownership with survivorship. Your mother added your name when she refinanced, likely as a way to protect the asset. If anything happened, the house wouldn't be fully exposed. Protect the asset, not protect me." Mini-climax settled into something heavier. So she made me part of it, I said slowly, without telling me? Yes. And now they can't sell it without me. Correct. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of it hitting me all at once. For years I had been the one left out of everything that mattered. Now I was the one thing they couldn't move without. Ruth turned another page in the file. There's more you should see. I looked down again. Bank notices, payment records, a series of missed deadlines that told a story even before Ruth explained it. Tyler's company hasn't been doing well. Quinn Construction is carrying more debt than it can handle. The house was likely used as collateral. I ran my finger along a line that showed a balance far higher than I expected. About 180,000, give or take. And if they don't sell, the bank will move forward with foreclosure. I exhaled slowly. That's why he sounded like that. Not desperate for me, desperate for time. Ruth watched me carefully. This isn't about reconciliation. It's about survival for them. I nodded. I figured. She closed the folder halfway, but didn't put it away. There's something else you should see. She stood up and walked over to a shelf behind her desk. When she came back, she was holding a small, worn box. I recognized it immediately. Margaret's. I've been holding on to this, Ruth said. I wasn't sure when the right time would be. She placed it gently in front of me. You might want to open it now. My hands hesitated for a second long before lifting the lid. Inside were letters, neatly stacked, carefully kept. I picked up the first one. The envelope was addressed in Margaret's handwriting. To Donna Quinn. There was no stamp. It was never sent, I said. Ruth shook her head. Some were, some came back. I pulled out another. This one had a stamp and a red mark across the front. Return to sender. I felt my chest tighten. I opened it. Margaret's handwriting filled the page, careful, direct. She wrote about me, about school, about how I was doing, about how she thought it would be good for Donna to reach out, to try again. There was no response attached. I reached for another, and another, each one the same pattern: effort, silence, return. Then I found the one that was different. The envelope was creased, like it had been handled more than the others. The message was shorter. The response was not Margaret's. It was written across the front in dark ink. She's not mine anymore. Mini-climax hit quietly. Not loud, not explosive, just final. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until Ruth spoke. I'm sorry you had to see that like this. I placed the letter back into the box carefully, like it might fall apart if I didn't. It's not new, I said. It's just confirmed. That was the word that fit. Confirmed. Everything I had felt as a child, everything I had tried to explain to myself as something else, something softer, something less intentional. It wasn't. It never had been. Ruth sat back down across from me. She said, "There's one more piece you should understand." I looked up. Your mother has been very active in her church, Grace Fellowship, for years. I know. She's told a story there, repeatedly. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. That I left, yes, and that she's been trying to find me, yes. I leaned back again, the chair creaking softly under the shift in my weight. So that's how it happened. Not just one lie, a system, a version of me that had been told so many times in so many rooms that it had become easier to believe than the truth. They believe her? Ruth didn't answer right away. People tend to believe the story they hear first, especially when it's told well. I let out a slow breath. And now they've already heard it. Yes. The room felt smaller, not because anything had changed, but because everything had just become clearer. Tyler's calls, the looks at the grocery store, the way Diane hesitated before answering my question. It all lined up. They weren't reacting to me, they were reacting to a version of me that had been built long before I walked back into their lives.
Ruth closed the folder completely this time. "You have leverage," she said, "legally and otherwise. The question is what you want to do with it." I looked down at the box of letters, then back at the file, and back at my own hands resting on the edge of the desk. What I wanted. That was the part no one had ever asked me before. Not at the train station, not in those foster homes, not even when Tyler called. They all assumed the answer, that I would come back, that I would fix it, that I would sign. I picked up the folder and slid it toward me. "I need copies of everything," I said. Ruth nodded. "I'll have them ready by the end of the day." I stood up, the box of letters still sitting between us. "Take it," Ruth said gently. I hesitated. Margaret kept those for a reason. I closed the lid and picked it up. On my way out, I paused at the door. "Ruth," I said. She looked up. "If I don't sign, how long do they have?" She didn't sugarcoat it. "Not long." I nodded once. That was enough. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not easier, just sharper, like everything had edges now. I walked to my car, set the box on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. On the drive back, I kept thinking about the two things sitting beside me, a stack of papers that proved they needed me, and a stack of letters that proved they never wanted me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I already knew something had changed. This wasn't about deciding whether to help them. It wasn't even about the house anymore. It was about something else entirely, something I hadn't had control over since I was 9 years old. The story, and for the first time, I had everything I needed to tell it myself.
Chapter 4. The Truth Has a Cost. I didn't go back inside right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, the box of letters on the passenger seat, and the copies of the deed and bank notices folded neatly in my bag, feeling the weight of both in a way that had nothing to do with paper. It wasn't just evidence, it was a choice. For years, I had lived with a version of the story that made me small, something I carried quietly because I thought that was what strength looked like. Now I had proof that everything I remembered was real, that nothing about it had been exaggerated or misunderstood. The question wasn't whether I could tell the truth, it was whether I was willing to accept what would happen after I did. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Tyler. An email notification. From Eric Vaughn. I opened it. It was formal, structured, polite in the way people are when they're trying to sound reasonable while making something very clear. He identified himself as legal counsel for Tyler Quinn and referenced the property on Maple Ridge. He acknowledged my co-ownership and requested my cooperation in the sale process. He mentioned the outstanding debt, the risk of foreclosure, and a timeline that ended with a date 10 days from now. 10 days. Mini-climax settled in quietly. This wasn't pressure anymore. This was a countdown. I read the email twice, then locked my phone and stepped out of the car. Inside, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. I placed the box of letters on the kitchen table next to the stack of documents and stood there, looking at them both like they belonged to two different lives. One that never wanted me, one that had been built without me, and me somewhere in between, deciding which one I would carry forward. The next morning, the library felt tighter. The same walls, the same shelves, the same quiet, but something underneath it all had shifted. I saw it in the way conversations paused when I walked past, in the way Diane didn't look up right away when I came in the way Mark Ellis called my name before I had even set my bag down. "Elara, can we talk?" I nodded and followed him into the same conference room as before. He closed the door, slower this time. "I wanted to check in," he said. "Things are getting louder." I sat across from him. "I'm aware." He hesitated. "I'm not asking for details," like he was trying to reassure himself more than me, "but the board is concerned. Donors are starting to ask questions." The Margaret reading room. Of course they were. "When is the next board meeting?" I asked. 2 days. I nodded. I'll have something to say before then. He studied my face for a second. You're sure you want to handle it that way? There was something in his voice that wasn't just concern, it was calculation, risk assessment. I thought about the letters, the deed, the way Tyler said we instead of I. I am, I said. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. All right, just be careful. Careful. I almost smiled. Careful had never protected me before. When I walked out of the room, Diane caught my eye. Hey, she said, softer this time, if you need anything. I nodded, but I didn't answer, because what I needed wasn't something anyone in that building could give me. By the time I got back to my office, my phone was buzzing again. Tyler. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. What now? There was no hesitation this time. Did you get the email? I did. Then you know we don't have time to play games. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. You seem to think this is a game. You're the one who put it at risk. A sharp breath on the other end. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. Silence. Then he changed tactics. Look, I know things weren't perfect, he said, but that was a long time ago. Mom is not the same person. I closed my eyes. Is she sorry? Another pause. She's sick, Elara. That's not what I asked. His voice hardened again. You always do this. Do what? Make everything about the past. I sat up, the edge in his tone finally cutting through. You left me at a train station. We were kids. You drove away. I didn't have a choice. I almost laughed. You always had a choice. The line went quiet. For a second, I thought he might hang up. Instead, he said my name. Elara. Not sharp, not angry, just tired. We can fix this, he said. Just sign the papers. We'll split whatever's left. You walk away clean. Walk away clean. Like I hadn't already done that once. I'm not signing anything right now. His patience snapped. You don't get to drag this out. There's a deadline. I know. Then act like it. I am. Another silence, heavier this time. You're really going to do this? I haven't done anything yet. Yeah, that's the problem. I ended the call before he could say anything else. For a moment, I just sat there, the quiet pressing in again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt sharp, defined, like edges of something I could finally see. That afternoon, the call I had been expecting came. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Hello? A breath. Then a voice I hadn't heard in almost 2 decades. We need to talk. Donna. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, thinner, but the tone underneath it hadn't changed. Still certain, still controlled. I didn't say anything. I heard you spoke to Tyler, she continued. He gets emotional. You know how he is. I let that sit. I got your message, I said. I'm glad, because time is something we don't have much of. There was again. Time. Always something I was supposed to give. What do you want? A pause. Then softer. I want my daughter to come home. The words should have meant something. They didn't. You haven't wanted that in a long time. Another pause. That's not true. I looked down at the desk in front of me, at the faint scratch near the edge where I had once dropped a stapler too hard. You told the state you didn't want me back. Silence. You wrote it down. A shift in her breathing. You don't understand what that time was like. I closed my eyes. You said I wasn't yours anymore. The line went completely still. For a second, I thought it had dropped. Then she spoke again, her voice tighter now. Margaret filled your head with a lot of things. There it was. Not regret, not apology, blame. She took you away from us. I felt something settle inside me, something that had been moving for days, finally finding its place. No, I said quietly. You let me go. Her breath hitched just slightly. You always were difficult, she said. Even as a child, you pushed people away. I opened my eyes, and in that moment, I knew there was nothing left to wait for. No version of this conversation that would change what had already been decided. Not by me, by her. "I'm not coming back," I said. Her voice sharpened. "You don't get to make that decision without thinking about me." "I have." Another pause. "You owe me that much." I almost smiled. "No," I said. "I don't." I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was clear. I sat there for a few minutes, letting it settle, letting the last piece fall into place. Then I reached into my drawer and pulled out the 2 drafts I had started the night before. One safe, one honest. I read the safe one first. It was good, polished, respectful. It said everything people wanted to hear about Margaret, about community, about growth. It didn't say anything that mattered. I set it aside. Then I picked up the other one. It wasn't clean, it wasn't careful. It was true. Mini-climax came quietly. I tore the safe version in half. Then again, then I dropped the pieces into the trash. I didn't rush, I didn't hesitate, I just made the choice. When I stood up, the room felt different. Not lighter, just aligned. For the first time since the phone started ringing, I wasn't reacting, I was deciding, and whatever happened next, it was going to happen because I let it. Chapter 5. The Day the Story Broke. The morning of the opening arrived bright and cold, the kind of clear fall day that makes everything look sharper than it feels. I got to the library before anyone else. The parking lot was still empty, the flag out front barely moving, the glass doors reflecting a version of me that looked calmer than I felt. I unlocked the building, stepped inside, and stood for a second in the stillness Margaret had always loved most. No voices, no phones, just the quiet hum of the lights waking up. Margaret reading room was ready. Fresh paint, low shelves, soft blue chairs, a reading rug in the center with little gold stars stitched into the edges. Along one wall, framed in simple black wood, was a photograph of Margaret smiling at something just beyond the camera, like whoever took it had caught her in the middle of deciding whether to say something kind or something clever. I carried my speech folder into my office and set it down on the desk. There was only one version in it now. At 9:15, Mark Ellis arrived with a box of donated pastries and a stiff expression of a man trying to appear useful because he did not know what else to be. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He looked at me for a second, then at the folder on my desk. "You all right?" I almost said yes on instinct. Instead, I gave him the truth he had earned and no more. "I will be." He nodded once. To his credit, he did not ask anything else. By 10, the first guests started trickling in. Board members, parents, volunteers, a few people from town who came to everything because showing up was part of how they understood themselves. Diane moved folding chairs into neat rows. Dolores Price arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a navy coat and that same expression she always had when she was measuring whether someone was about to rise or fall. She came straight over to me. "You look like a woman who has made up her mind," she said. "I think I have." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Good. It is exhausting watching people hesitate when they already know the truth." At 10:30, I saw them through the front doors. Tyler first, then Donna in a wheelchair, a blanket over her knees, thinner than I remembered but not softened by it. Karen Doyle was beside them, one hand resting lightly on the wheelchair handle, as if she had appointed herself guardian of the performance. Behind them, slower and more uncertain, came Pastor James Holloway. For one strange second, the whole room seemed to tilt. Not because I had not expected them, because I had. Because seeing them in Margaret's building, under Margaret's name, made everything feel more exact. Tyler spotted me immediately. His jaw tightened. Donna did not smile. Pastor Holloway gave me a small nod that held too much meaning for so little understanding. I walked over before any of them could come to me. "This is a public event," I said to Tyler, keeping my voice low. "You will be respectful or you will leave." His mouth twitched like he wanted to say something sharper, louder, meaner. Instead, he leaned in just enough for me to hear him. "You do not have to do this here." I looked at Donna. She met my eyes for only a second, then looked away first. That was answer enough. I stepped back. "Yes," I said, "I do." The room filled quickly after that. Parents with children, donors, church people I recognized from Grace Fellowship only because they had been looking at me differently all week. Mark started the program. He welcomed everyone, thanked the board, thanked donors, thanked Margaret for her years of service to education and literacy and the town. Then he introduced me. The applause was polite, warm enough, human. I walked to the front with the folder in my hand and stood at the little podium we had borrowed from City Hall because ours still wobbled if someone touched it too hard. From where I stood, I could see everyone. Dolores in the third row, Mark off to the side, tense but attentive, Diane near the doorway, Pastor Holloway sitting 2 rows back beside Karen, Karen standing against the far wall because he could never sit still when things were not going his way, Donna directly in the middle, wrapped in gray, looking like someone who spent years preparing to be pitied and had finally found the right room. I opened the folder. For a moment, I did exactly what the safe version would have done. I talked about Margaret. I talked about the first time I met her. I talked about the way she believed that every child deserved one quiet place in the world where they did not have to earn kindness first. I talked about the garden behind her house, the porch where she read to me, the fact that she never made me explain the worst thing that had ever happened to me before she decided I was worth saving. The room was still, good still, listening still. I looked down at the page, then back up. "There's something else I need to say today," I said. The shift in the room was immediate, subtle but real. A held breath, a chair adjusting, the sound of people preparing without yet knowing for what. This room carries Margaret's name, and if it's going to carry her name, then it should also carry the truth. Because Margaret never taught me to protect a lie just because it made other people comfortable. No one moved. 29 years ago, my mother drove me to a train station outside Richmond, told me to wait for her, and never came back. That kind of silence is different from ordinary silence. It doesn't feel empty, it feels crowded. I kept going. I was 9 years old. My brother was in the car. I stood on that platform until a woman named Margaret Calloway noticed that I was too small to be waiting alone for that long and asked me if I had eaten. Across the room, Tyler pushed off the wall. "Elara," he said. I lifted my eyes to him. "You don't get to interrupt me now, not after 29 years. He stopped. Someone in the crowd shifted hard enough that a chair leg scraped the floor. The state gave my mother 2 opportunities to take me back. She refused both, one by phone, one by certified mail. For the next 10 years, Margaret sent her letters, school updates, photos, open invitations. Most were ignored. One was returned with a sentence written across the front in blue ink. I paused, then said it plainly. "She's not mine anymore." A woman in the second row covered her mouth. I did not look at her. I did not look at anyone except straight ahead. For the past 15 years, my mother has told people at Grace Fellowship that I ran away as a child and that she spent those years grieving and searching for me. That is not true. I did not run away. I was left. There's a difference. I saw Pastor Holloway lower his eyes. Good. I wanted at least one person in that room to feel the weight of believing the wrong story too easily. And this week, I said, my family came back into my life, not because they missed me, not because they suddenly wanted the truth. They came back because my name is legally attached to a house on Maple Ridge, and they need my signature to sell it before the bank takes it. This time, the whispering actually started. Not loud, not chaotic, just the sound of certainty cracking.
Tyler took a step forward. "That's enough." His voice came out too loud, too thin, too late. "No," I said. "It is exactly enough." I reached into the folder and held up a copy of the deed, then set it back down. "My mother put my name on that property when I was a child as part of an estate planning arrangement. My brother cannot sell it without me. That is why he called. That is why the story suddenly reached this town. That is why some of you have been looking at me like I abandoned a dying woman instead of asking what kind of mother leaves a 9-year-old at a train station and then tells her church she was the one who ran away."
Karen made a small, wounded sound. Tyler muttered something under his breath. Donna stared straight ahead, her mouth pressed into a line so thin it looked painful. Then, finally, Pastor Holloway stood. "Miss Quinn," he said quietly, "if what you are saying is true, I owe you an apology." I looked at him and thought about the phone call, about the weight of Sunday he had tried to place on me like it was mine to carry. "You do," I said, "but that is between you and your conscience." No one clapped, no one gasped dramatically. Real rooms do not work like that. Real rooms go still and then start changing one face at a time. Dolores stood up first. "I have known Elara for years," she said, turning just enough for everyone to hear, "and I think the shame in this room belongs somewhere else." That broke the final thing holding it together. Not into chaos, into truth. People turned, not toward me anymore, toward Donna, toward Tyler, toward the versions of them they had accepted without question. Tyler walked toward the front then, fast enough that Mark moved instinctively between us. For one absurd second, I thought he might actually try to take the papers from my hands, the way people do when they still believe force can undo humiliation. He stopped 3 feet away. "You really wanted this," he said, low and furious, "to make us look like monsters." I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "You did that yourselves. I just stopped helping you hide it." He stared at me, and for the first time since he had started calling, I saw something under the anger. Fear. Good. Donna finally spoke then, her voice weak but sharp in all the places that mattered. "You should have handled this privately." The room heard it. Not "I am sorry," not "I was wrong." Privately. I almost smiled. "You had 29 years to handle it privately. You chose publicity first." Then I closed the folder. That is all I have to say. No one moved right away. Then slowly, people began to do what people do when the truth lands harder than gossip. They reoriented. They found new places for their eyes. They chose who to stand near. Dolores came to me first. "Well," she said, her voice steady and dry, "that certainly changes things." Mark looked like a man who had just watched a fire burn inches from his own shoes and realized it was not coming for him after all. "The reading room will open as planned," he said, almost too quickly. I nodded. "It should." Pastor Holloway approached next. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. "Miss Quinn," he said, "I was wrong." "Yes," I said. "He took that better than most men do. I am sorry." This time I believed that he meant it, which did not make it enough, but made it real. "Thank you," I said, and moved past him before he could ask me for absolution I was not offering. The rest happened more quietly. Tyler left first, fast and angry and unable to make eye contact with anyone on his way out. Karen followed him. Donna stayed a few minutes longer, not speaking, not looking at me, as if refusing to acknowledge the room could somehow restore what it had taken from her. Then Pastor Holloway wheeled her out. I watched them go and felt nothing dramatic, no triumph, no pity, just the deep, clean stillness of something finally set down. 3 weeks later, I signed the paperwork to release my share of the Maple Ridge property sale. By then, the numbers were final. After debt and fees, my portion came to just over $65,000. Ruth Adler brought the check to my house herself. "You can keep it," she said. "I know. No one would judge you if you did." I looked at the paper in my hands, at the amount that represented a house I was never truly allowed to live in, a childhood I did not get to keep, and a family that only remembered me when the bank did. For a few seconds, I imagined keeping it, paying off the rest of Margaret's medical bills, expanding the reading room, replacing my car, doing something practical, something deserved. Instead, I set the check down and wrote out transfer instructions to Donna's hospice account. Ruth watched me without speaking. When I finished, I wrote one line on the memo sheet: "This is not forgiveness." Ruth read it, then looked up at me. "What is it then?" I thought about Margaret, about the sandwich at the station, about the porch, about the woman who had never once confused kindness with surrender. "It is what she taught me," I said. Ruth nodded once, folded the paper, and took it with her. After she left, I walked to the reading room and unlocked the door. A little girl and her mother were already waiting outside. The girl looked up at me with one hand wrapped around a library card like it was something magical. "Can we go in now?" she asked. I smiled and opened the door wider. "Of course." She ran inside, straight to the low shelves, to the books, to the kind of quiet that lets a child breathe easier without even knowing why. I stood there for a moment, one hand still on the door, and looked at Margaret's photograph on the wall. The truth had cost me something. It always does. But silence had cost me more. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, I think you already know that. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, and if stories like this stay with you, stay here with me. There's always another one waiting.